Data security plays an important role in any business process. You want to control which users have access to an object, what fields are visible to the user, and what records are accessible to the user. You have learned to control the object level access using profiles and permission sets, and field level access using field level security. Let's talk about features on this platform that will let us control the record level security. Before we dive in, a user can be given different levels of access to records: read-only, edit, and full access. Full access gives users privileges like ability to share records, transfer ownership, and even delete records. When you have multiple users accessing the application, you want to think about who has access to records in an object, what level of access do they have, and why do they have access. Every user can access their own records, but what about records that one does not own? To control the record level security, we have organization-wide defaults. Organization-wide defaults is the baseline level of security access for records one does not own. It can be set up for every object. If the organization-wide defaults is private, users have access to only their records. If it's public read-only, every user is allowed to read all the records. If the organization-wide defaults is public read-write, every user is allowed read and edit all the records. And remember, organization-wide defaults is the only way to secure access to records while building the sharing model. Determining the organization-wide defaults is quite simple. You would want to pick the most restricted user of an object and ask yourself the following questions. At any instance, should this user not be allowed to see any records? If the answer is yes, then the organization-wide defaults are private. If no, then you would want to ask yourself another question. At any instance, should this user not be allowed to edit any records? If yes, then the organization-wide defaults are public read-only. If no, then it's public read-write. To set up organization-wide defaults, you can go to Security Controls, Sharing Settings. Here, you can set up org-wide defaults for both standard and custom objects. Let me change the organization-wide defaults of the position object to private. This will make sure that every user can access only their records in the position object. I would like to make a small note here. For the two standard objects, leads and cases, you have one more organization-wide default setting, which is public read-write transfer. This permission lets users transfer ownership of records from one user to another. And if two objects are related by a lookup relationship, they have independent organization-wide defaults. But when they are related by a master detail relationship, the child object inherits organization-wide defaults from the parent. You can notice the review object inheriting organization-wide defaults from the job application object. Let's see how we can use organization-wide defaults in a particular scenario. There are 4 users who have access to records in the position object. User 2 should not be allowed to see any records other than his own. User 3 and 4 should be allowed to see all the records owned by users 1 and 2. Since user 2 is the most restricted user, the org-wide defaults would be private. This gets you into thinking, how can user 3 and 4 access other records? You can make exceptions to organization-wide defaults. I'll talk about them in the next lecture.